Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Azeroth Daily for the 14th of April 2011. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of WoW news and comments. In the headlines today, the Ask the Devs number 5 collection has been released. Collection, God, it sounds like a soundtrack. Wouldn't that be absolutely awesome? I'd actually buy that, I think. Coming soon to a store near you. Ask the Devs, the musical. No, we will never give you vanilla realm. That's awful. Whatever the case, this one is on the subject of achievements, and it is available on the Battle.net site. You can go and read the full thing. There was a lot of information here about the achievement system. If you have any interest in that whatsoever, passing or otherwise, I would highly recommend that you go and check it out. New player tips. Yes, if you happen to be a new player, these are tips for you. And the new player tips segment this week is defend yourself. This is profession advice for PvP. So, which profession should you take for PvP? Which items should you go for, etc., etc. And if you wish to contribute to this and help out the newbies, you can do so. And you can click the link in the description below this video. I would recommend giving them terribly bad advice so that when they get to your level, they'll be easier to kill. But then again, I'm an unreasonable bastard. And that's it for the news. There is nothing else going on, I am afraid. It's been a little bit of a quiet day. So with that, it's time for your Daily Blues. Kimber Lee seems to have a couple of problems with spelling, including that of Ramdom. Yes, and her own name. A little bit disturbing. However, this very short rant is on the subject of random dungeons for levels below 80. And also, likes making own stuff. Please stop taking stuff away from us. I like making bullet. Quite. Well, I think that needs to be reported to the police, but whatever the case, the response does come in from Bashiok, and it is reasonable, thank God, because the OP certainly wasn't. And his response is that you do in fact have access to the dungeons pre-level 80, however they are not through the dungeon finder. You can build a group, go to a nearby meeting stone, summon up and achievement chase or what have you. It's very much available. The intent of the dungeon finder is to make sure that you focus on the most relevant content and gives you easy access to that. And encouraging people to focus on old content is something they actually want to avoid through a tool that's purpose is to provide quick matchmaking. Yes. You know, the problem I've got with the OP is, oh, why can't we have this thing which makes things easier? Stop dumbing down the game! Some bizarre cognitive dissonance going on there, I feel. A potentially good suggestion from Empress Davy right here on the customer support forums on EU Battle.net, where she or he suggests that there should be an option when you submit a GM ticket to mark a box that says response not required, and that might speed up the GM process. Unfortunately, it would seem that Ireline from customer services doesn't really understand what exactly the OP is getting at, and goes on to say that these days we try to make sure that every player contacting us receives an online reply as soon as possible, and that as few as possible receive an offline response. If you'd prefer not to be whispered, please feel free to say so in your ticket. Right. Well, here's the thing. The OP is trying to suggest something that might actually help speed up the GM process by getting rid of all those pointless replies. For instance, as the OP pointed out, that if you submit a report for a botter, for instance, that you see, you don't need a response to that. You don't need any kind of response, including, I might add, a automated response to the mail. You don't need it. It's a waste of time. So I fully support the OP, in fact. I think that's a great idea. I can't imagine why Blizzard wouldn't implement it. For God's sake, they've done plenty of other things to cut corners, and this one actually makes sense, and would probably help people out. So, yeah, please do what Empress Davy actually suggests, Blizzard. It is a good suggestion. It's a good idea. We don't need GM responses all the time, and it would be awesome to get those queue times down. And with that, it's time for your daily grind. This one is a little bit further along in this Westfall chain regarding Horatio Lane, and this one involves feeding the homeless. Yes, it's a nice feel-good quest. You have to take that Westfall stew, yes, that's still in the game, and go and feed it to some of the hungry people. Should make you feel good. It's an altruistic kind of quest. It's awesome. Give you a little bit of karma. Also, does this scene remind anybody of something from, say, Dragon Age 2? It's awfully familiar. BioWare, have you been having a look at World of Warcraft? Yes, I know you have. Nothing wrong with that. And with that, it's time for your weekly feature, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mod Your WoW. So, as always, I have 3 mods for you to have a look at today, and the first one is really simple. It's called Tabbed Dungeon Browser. And it puts the Dungeon Finder, the Raid Browser, and the Battleground system all in a single window, which is an absolutely fantastic idea. You can just flick through the tabs to access everything, although sadly that doesn't mean that the Raid Finder will actually be used in any way. It's not really a Raid Finder, it's a Raid Browser and listing system, which is kind of useless, but that's not the fault of the mod. I see no reason for you not to have this. It just seems like it should be part of the UI already. Why is it not? This one is called Talented. Now, Talented can work for pretty much any class that you happen to be playing, and it's an additional little tab at the bottom of the talent window. And what this will allow you to do is save, load, and import templates, and you can list them and flick between them very easily. One of its best features is the fact that you can import directly from Wowhead or the Blizzard Talent Calculator simply by pasting a URL in there, and amazingly it will just pop up. And then what you can do is you can apply it in one click, which is very useful for times when you've either had to reset your talents or the game has reset your talents, say after a major patch or anything like that. So that's very cool. And of course you can muck about with various different builds and save them and analyze them and go back in and edit them. So yeah, that seems like something that should be useful for pretty much anyone, and it's a nice and lightweight mod as well. It will also allow you to export the builds very easily. Now, the final one, this is an option for those of you who are looking into various ways of monitoring your cooldowns. I've showed you a couple of ways already, including the scrolling battle text, as well as Vortex Assist that I've got down the bottom of the screen right there. This is a remake of the old cooldown pulse mod by Jim. Now, Jim is apparently no longer doing mods, so Doom came along and came up with this, and it's pretty similar to the old version, whereby you can configure a pulse whenever something comes off cooldown to alert you to use it again. So that might be very helpful for mages, for instance, who forget to use Flame Orb as soon as it's off cooldown. Very handy, and you can customize the size and the opacity and the length of the animation. I think the only thing I don't like about this is the fact that it doesn't seem to have any functionality for any kind of audio alerts. It would be very, very nice if it did. That's the one thing that I would definitely like to see in there. And customizable alerts for, say, different spells, so that I wasn't necessarily having to look at that, but it would tell me just a little bit of sound through my ears, would just say, hey, look, your Flame Orb's ready, etc. And you can keep an eye on the fight as opposed to your actual bars. I'm sure there are other mods that do that, but Doom Cooldown Pulse is a nice lightweight option for those of you looking for a way to keep an eye on those pesky long cooldown abilities. And there you go, folks. There's your mods for the week, all of them available for download in the description below this video. And with that, it's time for the mailbox. This one comes in from Kenny C, who says, Dear Biscuit, the problem that Blizzard is trying to solve with the calls to arms system is caused by a flood of DPS in the Dungeon Finder. Do you think it might solve the problem more permanently if we were simply to add a fourth role button in the interface, pure DPS, which could only be checked by mages, rogues, hunters, and warlocks, that would prioritize them in front of the queue, ahead of Ret Paladins, Shadow Priests, and Fury Warriors, etc.? They have the option of getting in nigh on instantly anyway if they were just dual spec as healers or tanks, or would the backlash from the DPS-minded hybrid classes be more than Blizzard would care to handle? P.S. Being a tank myself, it's the most stressful role out there, since if we balls it up once, an entire group can die and vote to kick, since they usually expect a lot from us. Oh, God. Well, I'll tell you, this would be beneficial to me if I ever decided to pug, and every now and again you might just log on and maybe there's nobody on your guild, maybe you decide to go on late at night and you just fancy doing a dungeon. So this is going to be beneficial to me. However, I'm not entirely sure it's fair. I don't think it's really reasonable to force players into different roles. And let's be honest, if you're putting hybrid DPS at the bottom of a pile, that's basically what you're doing if you're going into the Dungeon Finder. If you happen to be, say, a feral druid doing cat damage or a balanced druid or something like that. That doesn't seem fair and reasonable to me. I think people should be able to play what they want. I think really this is more of an inherent problem within the game, that tanking is not a desirable role to play, and that's why people don't do it, and neither is healing. So perhaps it's because Blizzard hasn't designed those roles in a good enough way, and it's not encouraging people to actually do them. Now, again, as much of a benefit to me as this would be, I don't think Blizzard is going to use the stick approach, and this is basically what this is. You might say, oh, well, it's a carrot to pure DPS, but it's really not. I mean, it's not encouraging pure DPS to be pure DPS. It is discouraging hybrid DPS from being that, and they don't like to do that. Blizzard hate to punish people for choices, and I actually don't blame them. I don't think it's fair to punish people for legitimate choices. We're not talking about ridiculous specs right here. We're talking about specs that are supposedly completely viable and reasonably balanced in PvE. So I do not think that's going to happen, and I don't think it's reasonable either. It is a much more deep-seated problem. Is it with the game itself, in the fact that tanking and healing isn't fun? I don't know. If you are a tank or a healer, why don't you leave a comment in the section below this particular video, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion as to whether or not tanking and healing is actually enjoyable, and what kind of things would you like to see in order for tanking and healing to be more enjoyable. I think there are so many deep-seated problems within the game right now as regards to the roles that quick fixes like this will only harm more in the long run. They're a band-aid for a much larger problem, and that's got to be dealt with. You can't just put a band-aid on or a plaster in the UK and hope that the infection goes away. It won't. It will spread if it's not treated at its source, and that's what has to happen. This one comes in from Nicole Simmons, who says, I've recently encountered an irritating problem within WoW. I'm not a raider, and nor do I particularly want to be part of progression raiding. I do not see the chase of high stats as my goal within the World of Warcraft. I'm a role player and a collector of rare and interesting items within the game. Good example of which is my DK, who has, among other things, full dungeon set 1 for at least 4 characters. Now, onto my problem. I recently spent an irritating time in a group with an interesting chap who, upon hearing that I did not want to raid, accused me of not wanting to play the game as it was meant to be played. This rather irritated me because surely in a game such as WoW, the aim is not so singular. I enjoy running old raids, collecting rare pets, mounts, and armor. So my questions are thus. Do you believe that WoW is just a game of grind? That the goal is to get the highest stats you possibly can? Or is it a game where you can do what you want to have fun? And in this MMORPG, has the RP, role-playing, etc. become lost? Within an endless sea of bank alts and DKs named Arthas and rogues named Aztabugut, what the hell is that? I don't even want to know. Whatever. Can we really declare the amazing deeds of Lol Shami, Savior Azeroth? Lastly, I would like to thank him for providing the show, etc. Right, well, here's the thing, right? And nobody has the right to tell you how to enjoy World of Warcraft as long as you are not negatively affecting other people's experience of the game. It's as simple as that. I've always believed this. If you want to be an RPer, cool. If you want to be a PvPer, cool. If you want to do nothing more than pretend to be some kind of vendor in the middle of Stormwind selling cockroaches, you do that. I don't care, as long as it is not affecting the playstyle of me and others around me, as long as it's not having a negative impact on the game, which as far as I'm concerned, that is not. Here's the thing, though, and this is kind of a quote that I took from the EVE Online developers CCP, and it's still pretty accurate, that World of Warcraft and games like World of Warcraft, they're theme parks, whereas, say, something like EVE Online is a sandbox. In EVE Online, you have a much greater capacity to make your own fun because of the way that the game is. It's very dynamic, and the metagame is perhaps more important, whereas with World of Warcraft, it's a theme park. You can go on whichever rides you wish, but you can only go on those rides in one particular way. That's the thing. So, after a time, things will become repetitive, and really, the game is designed to reward you for very specific activities. It's not designed to reward you for collecting rare and interesting items most of the time, unless you really value achievements, and it's not designed to reward roleplay. Now, one might argue that this is a big problem within the game, and that is perhaps the case. The problem is the nature of the game does not support sandbox play of any real description. That said, even though it doesn't, it is your right to try and find fun wherever you desire, as long as it doesn't negatively affect somebody else's enjoyment. And in this case, what you're doing certainly does not. Personally, I find it a little bit odd. I wouldn't enjoy that, but each to their own. You pay your subscription, you can do whatever you want within the confines of the game rules. So no, I don't think you have to raid at all. I don't think you have to PvP, quest, or do anything. You know, hell, a lot of people hold a subscription simply to use WoW as a chat room. That is up to them. That is what they want to do. The game supports them doing that. They're not doing anything against the rules. They're not bothering anybody. So go nuts. Go nuts. Okay, folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching Azeroth Daily. Please remember to thumb it up and favorite it if you like it. That is very much appreciated, and it really does help the show. So thanks to all of those who are doing that. As I said in the previous episode, I will try and get an episode out tomorrow. I am probably looking to do all the recording and stuff in the morning before I leave, and then I'll try and do the editing on the train down to Birmingham for the Gadget Show. Any of you that are going to be at the Gadget Show, I will be near the Alienware stand, casting StarCraft 2 on the Saturday and the Sunday for the the £5,000 Gadget Show Invitational Tournament. And please feel free to stop by and say hello if you happen to be going to that particular event. That will be, needless to say, in the Gaming Zone area. Okay, folks, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.